Welcome back. This is Fabrication, Instant Spool Performance. I'm Bradley Carter. Dalton Carter's behind the camera. We got a comment on a video. First comment we've ever gotten. It has words, not numbers. I don't know what those are all about. It's from Colton R. He asks, or says, love these videos. You should make a video on the small tuning you can do to a P700 to get the brake specific fuel ratio down. Essentially, we're going to kind of go over that as well as just tuning in general. The brake specific obviously applies the entire time the engine is running. We generally only look at the brake specific typically at wide open throttle for competition purposes. To try and figure it out through the entire spectrum is difficult, and you can really only tune that whole spectrum accurately with a electronically tuned injection system. So VP44s and common rails. With a P700 we kind of get stuck with about 1,000 RPM window that we can really target hard. And other than that, it's not going to be that great everywhere else. That's just how it is. We have fixed timing. Oh, the 215 pumps have a timing advance thing in them. No one's ever quite understood it. Everybody just says that they have it. I haven't seen any paperwork, I should say, on when the advance starts, in terms of rack travel, and how much rack travel it has to go once it starts to advance every per degree. So that data, it's pretty difficult to even try and say tune that on a mechanical truck. So what we're going to be looking at is mainly tuning right here. And the cool thing with diesels is that when they start to run too rich, we get a haze, and a darker haze and a darker haze, and we get to what I deem as smoke is when you can't see through it. So that's basically when the opacity is that dark and you can't see through. That's what we would call a smoking condition, and everything from there up to a very light haze that's hard to see is a haze, and we just do the hazes in levels: light haze, medium haze. We'll have to take a break to put all this on the board, and you might be looking at this because you just went from nothing on board to the board being full. So we're going to kind of go over what all this stuff is. So again, we're using the 359 cubic inch 5.9 liter Cummins engine. More than likely, if you guys are 12 valve or P-pump guys, or I should say most of you guys are P-pump guys, it's mostly going to be 12 valve stuff, or owners. But this applies to any diesel engine. You just got to change some of the numbers around. We're just using this one because this is what we deal with the most and get to see every single day. So whether it's P-pump 24 valve, P-pump 12 valve, common rail, VP, all that stuff, all this applies. But we're not using the 6.7 engine or the 6.6 Thermax or the 6.4, 6.0, 7.3, 6.7 Power Stroke. But you can do all the same stuff. You just get on in our earlier videos, it shows the thing we're using on the phone, the website, about where to put in the cubic inch of the engine, the volumetric efficiency of the engine, and it'll output you a normally aspirated CFM. So you can do it for any of them. You just got to take your liter, convert it to cubic inches, and cubic inches, enter it, and output the number. For this case, because it keeps it easy, all these are at 80% VE. Without variable cam timing, the VE changes throughout the whole RPM curve. If you had a really tiny turbocharger, we would not be at 80% at 3500. If you had a really big turbocharger, we would not be at 80% at 1500. But for the case of learning, this is all 80% volumetric efficiency, or VE, we like to call it. So this category is engine RPM. This is our normally aspirated CFM. This is the NACFM converted all over to the same pounds minute of air. In this case, we used 0.07 to convert all of these numbers over just to keep it easy. For learning purposes, the air weighed the same at all these engine RPMs. So the NACFM of the engine times 0.07 to get our pounds minute times 60 to get pounds hour of air. And then in this case, we're going to be running a 25:1 AFR. So what you do is you take your air, you divide it by 25, and that gives us our pounds hour of fuel, and then using another converter online, the Witch Hunter one for one that we did for brake specific, to go from cc's to pounds hour. Just in the reverse, we're going from pounds hour to cc's. So in this case, 20.9 pounds hour of fuel put in the converter gives you a big cc number. You take that number, divide it by the number of injectors you're using. In this case, on the 6 cylinders, it's 6, so divided by 6 is 36.58 cc's. So that's as much cc's as we can put in, cc's minute we can put in 1500 RPMs with this CFM to hold on to a 25-to-1 AFR. So I hope all this kind of makes sense. I think I went over it clearly. Did I go over it clearly?
Clear, maybe a little fast.
So what we're going to do is look at why you can tune using the smoke. Now, we do not condone smoking on the street. Smoke in competition or on a dyno, perfectly acceptable. The fuel type just does that. It's in its nature to smoke because of its burn speed and its chemical makeup. We end up with smoke, especially when the AFR, it's an AFR deal. When the AFR gets below a certain point, right about 20-to-1 on most like a standard injection duration. We have seen very light hazes at low AFRs, so below the smoke threshold, but it's because the injection duration is really short. So we generally only see that happen on VP trucks and common rail trucks, where they can have a very short duration but move a large quantity of fuel. The P pumps are pretty much exempt from this until the P pump gets really big. So until you get into, say, even the 13 mils still seem to be dirty, but when you get up into like the 16, or I should say 14, 15, 16, 17 mil stuff where the plunger is really big, so you can move a lot of fuel with a short duration, they seem to be able to run a lot cleaner at lower than normal AFRs. But if remember, we're dealing with 5.9 liter 12 valve in this case, that's what we normally deal with. 20-to-1 is where you're going to start to see a haze. 25-to-1 is clean. Most of your factory these trucks from the factory came at peak torque or peak horsepower or whatever you want to look at, but they would run about 25-to-1 AFR in the factory. So that's what we're going to look at. If you want to run as clean as the factory, that's the AFR target you got to hit. You got to hit 25-to-1, and the goal is to hit 25-to-1 through the entire RPM spectrum. So what you got to look at, what we do, is we look at the engine size, and we look at boost per RPM. So if we put a bigger turbocharger on this engine, we're going to have less boost per RPM in the lower spectrum, meaning that we're going to have to actually pull fuel away. We're going to have to take torque away, pull fuel away. So it's going to run cleaner, but it's going to make less torque to match a 25-to-1 AFR, so it burns clean. And by doing this, the turbo does spool a little bit slower. We're taking heat energy out, and we're also taking the engine's ability to produce energy out of the equation as well by taking the fuel out, because it will continue to produce torque going below as the AFR goes down. It'll continue to make more power, but it gets dirty, and on the street, that's not what we want. And we get kind of a lot of questions about this, like, how do I get like a really clean running truck that makes a lot of power? The thing is, it's really all, when it comes to turbo diesels, it is all in the turbo selection and what your injection system and engine can do. So I said, fixed cam timing, fixed engine size doesn't change as the engine revs up, so you're stuck with what you got. In our case, 359 cubic inches. Do we have the smallest engine? Yeah, 5.9. Yeah, 5.9, because then it's 6.7, 6.0, 7.3, 6.6, 6.4. Yeah, so I mean, in this case, for like the 12 valve guys, we have the smallest mainstream diesel engine when it comes to performance turbo diesel. So we're really at the mercy of how quickly we can get the charger online. So the bigger the turbo gets, the more fuel we have to take out in the low range, even though, and it'll do it every time. We tune trucks on the street to burn clean with dial gauges from inside the cab. And what happens is when we get them to run, every time we back and pull fuel out during the run-up phase, so running up to boost, because we have a number we want to get to, say we want to get to 40 pounds, well, and then gate it and hold it, Well, everywhere we got to tune the fuel inputs all the way up to that 40 to get there cleanly. So we can't just floor the thing and drop the AFR to 15 to 1, get the turbo online faster, produce more torque, but we're going to make a big thing of smoke. It's going to make a mess. It's not pretty, and it's pretty frowned upon in the diesel industry. We don't condone it. Most of your current respected shops don't condone it. So what you got to do on a P700, I should probably go get the injection pump, is you need to, has nothing really to do with fuel plate. We've had pumps built by some of the best builders in the country, and they basically all run a flat plate. So it's a fuel plate that's just ground flat. Sorry if that's any trade secrets or not, but it's nothing fancy. Ground thing flat, but leave the plate in, because the plate will do two things. One, it'll allow you to limit CCs. So if you want to limit it to a certain total peak horsepower, that's what the plate's for. The reason that we like the plate is that it keeps you from doing what's called hanging a rack. And what hanging a rack is that there's a rack that connects to all the plungers, and it actually goes outside the front end of the pump. That's why there's called a rack plug at the end. I'd presume the rack can come out that direction when rebuilding it. Never rebuilt a P700. There's a bajillion parts, don't want to mess with it. But the rack actually comes out, and it can or whatever bottom out against the rack plug. What can happen is the rack can actually fall off of its guide rail, or the guide slot that's machined into the pump, and it'll fall down, and when you release the throttle, it won't return. It'll stay at max rack travel. And if you've ever had the opportunity to drive a P-pump truck in which the plungers get sticky, it's basically the same thing, where one plunger sticks and the rack no longer returns, and the other 5 plungers are still running the engine. So you can sound the brakes as hard as you want, but it will not turn the truck off, and it'll drive you into a wall, it'll drive you into somebody else, it'll drive you somewhere if you can't get the thing unstuck. So that's the big thing is safety, why we like to leave a fuel plate in. If you want to send your injection pump in to have it rebuilt, all the builders that we've used all want a fuel plate. Don't take it out. So we'll get back into this. We talked about fuel plate, so for the next step. So what happens at these parts is, say we're at 0 boost at 1500, say we're on an S400 on a 5.9 12 valve, we're at 0 boost or one pound. Essentially, we can't put in a whole lot of fuel. The truck has to be slow until we get up to the higher RPMs, where there's enough exhaust energy to create enough boost pressure that we can start raising all these levels up. So to kind of explain that, what we're going to do is, say we're on an S400 and we don't get to 15 pounds of boost until 2500 RPMs. So say we had 15 at 2500, what we're going to do, we're just going to make this really easy. Just go 15 plus 14.7, divide by 14.7, 2.0 pressure ratio. Take that number, theoretical compressor efficiency, 70%, so times 0.7. We're going to go through, which is 1.41. We're going to go through our intercooler, 45% gain times 1.45, 1.5, that's the 4. 2.12 density ratio. We're going to take our 212 density ratio, multiply it by 207.75. So if we're using this one, this here, we're at 15 pounds here with the, what did we have? Oops, no. I think it's a 212 density ratio. 15 pounds of boost means we now have 440.7 CFM. Take that number, multiply it by 0.07 to convert to pounds. 440.7 times 0.07. 30 pound. So we have 30 pounds minute instead of, what the heck happened here? Oh, that's out, I was looking wrong. Instead of 14.54 pounds minute of air, we now have 30 pounds minute of air. So now we want to convert that to hour. So times 60. So multiplied by 60, that gives us 1,850.94. There. Take this. Divide by 25. $74 hour, fuel. So with that, we're going to go over to our converter on witchhunter.com. We will convert that over. 74. Go up to 777 cc's. 707 divided by our 6 cylinders means we can actually now put in the chamber 129.5 cc's. So we have to wait. We have this ramp rate we can see from 1500 RPMs to 2500 RPMs, where we have to meter in from 36.58 cc's to 129.5 cc's to net a 25-to-1 AFR. And that's where it gets tricky, because there's on a P pump, there's no readout that tells you how much you're putting in. So what you do is you use called the star wheel, which is basically just a spring rate adjuster inside the AFC head. And typically when we go to a bigger turbocharger, we have to tighten that up. The reason they got the aftermarket springs. Also, I should say, one thing that really does help is going to an aftermarket spring kit for the AFC housing, but before you buy one of those, you need to know what your max boost pressure is going to be. Because they have ones from the stock one, the stock AFC spring is about 22 pounds, 20 to 22 pounds. Next one up, I think they have a 35, a 45, 60, and a 65 spring. So say your setup with this S400 setup runs 50 pounds of boost, you wouldn't want to put a 65 pound spring in the AFC housing, because now you'll never see full rack travel. It's just like pulling the fuel plate back. So you'd run a 45 pound spring with a little bit more tension. And the reason usually why you don't want to run a too light of a spring is that you're going to have to crank down a lot of tension on that. And there is a point on the P700s where if you tighten the star wheel up too much, the rack will become limited again. So a lot of the pumps that we get back from builders are set to around full rack at 20 psi, because usually by this point we've hit the domino effect, 20 pounds of boost. The motor thinks it's about 1.5 times its normal size, and it starts this ramp rate where it can climb through the boost curve really fast. So it's really important is the tuning up to that 20 pounds. But if we tighten the star wheel up, that moves the full rack to 25 pounds. So it can be tricky using springs that are, say, half the pressure of what you actually see on the street or down the track. With small quick spooling turbochargers, the softer springs are usually pretty easy to tune, but with the bigger turbochargers, running the stiff spring that matches the maximum pressure you're going to run, or at least as close as you can get, but shooting under, like we said, if we're going to run 50 pounds of boost, we would choose a 45 pound spring, not the 65 pound spring, because if we chose the big spring, we would never see full rack travel. And this takes a lot of time. This is where we talk about the tuning aspect, where a lot of people throw the parts in, but don't do any tuning. And that tuning part is important, just like we talked about the brake specific. So it's really important, one, for the maximum power output, and two, it's really important for the cleanliness of the vehicle. So you can tune your diesels just like you tune a two-stroke engine. You really can, just because of the fuel type work. Its chemical makeup creates this AFR condition where we can visually tune. We can also use the EGT. If it is running clean at all times, we can use the EGT gauge to get an idea of what's going on, or to see if something's wrong. Because if everything's running clean but the thing's down to power, or everything's running clean but it's running really hot, typically that can be an injector issue, where the injector, the spray pattern is poor, or the pressure that the injector is spraying at is low, will cause both of those conditions. So you can see it just takes a lot of time. And the part that, like I said, that gets difficult is to make it run that clean, we are going to make less power through the ramp. So that takeaway kind of makes it hard for a lot of people, including myself, to say pull fuel out to the point it runs clean and give up that torque, because we can see that at 50, or even we can do one at 2,000 RPMs, we can see how much power we can make. But even, let's say 2,500 RPMs, we want to run 25 to 1 AFR, and then at this 2,500 mark, we've hit the domino point at 2,500 to 3,500. We can bring the fuel in a lot harder, because boost pressure per RPM is climbing much faster. Say 1,500 to 2,500, we made 20 pounds of boost. At 2,500 to 3,500, we gained another 30 pounds of boost. So we can see that the boost per RPM was faster in this range than it was in this range. So that's why we can get more aggressive with the fueling once the turbo gets up to the higher RPM point. That said, quick spool turbos tend to kind of get you around a lot of this, but you can still run into issues. What happens to, I guess, a really good explanation we can do is the stock turbo. I guess this would be a really good point, because I think most of us have experienced this that have done turbo changes. So we have our stock turbocharger, and we like how it spools and responds, and we go and throw injectors and delivery valves in. I think I went over tuning P-pumps good. Did I go over that good? Oh, he doesn't know. Well, you guys let me know if I went over it good, if I missed anything. I guess we were talking about too, like targeting like an RPM one on the P700. The turbo will kind of tell you what that window is going to be. We want to tune in there. So if we have like a turbo that hits peak torque at 2,000 RPMs, then we're going to want to set our timing up based on the fuel and the RPM we want to do. So if our RPM window is 2 to 3,000, because that's what the turbocharger sets it at, then that's where, and then based on the amount of fuel we're putting in the cylinder per injection event, that's how we're going to do our timing. And that's going to be different for everybody, unless you're in our same area or you're in the same area of someone who's done it before, because your atmospheric conditions will have a large effect on what that should be. And if I had my injectors built by one place and you had your injectors built by another place, my data no longer supports or allows me to be as helpful to you, just as your data would be less helpful to me, because the hole size of the injector is like 20% of the story. Is there pinto work done? What's the pop pressure? What's the injector hole quality from the inside to the outside? How is the fuel plume, like the shape of it? How far into the chamber is it going? What is your boost pressure you are running? And what's the temperature of the air? What's your intercooler? What's your intercooler doing? Are you running water injection? All these things change the chamber temperature, as well as the fuel plume density and droplet size, which changes the timing that you're going to need to run for that setup. So we're kind of pretty careful about recommending timing, just because there is no one fits all. Just, you don't buy a 5 by 16 and put it to 25 degrees. And just like, our pull truck, it runs custom built 5x18s, but the thing runs 35 degrees. And the thing's designed to run between 3,000 and 4,000 RPMs. They're custom built 5x18 that flow a lot more than your typical 5x18. So the hole size really doesn't mean a whole lot. What does mean a lot is the hone quality through the nozzle, the pinto work, the body work, how much pressure they're popping at, all that stuff will depict what the right timing for you is. But the big thing is the turbo will kind of set the window you want to work in, because we don't go buy a ginormous turbocharger that runs at 5,000 RPMs to go tow our trailers, and we don't buy a turbo we tow our trailers with to go run 5,000 RPMs. So we choose the turbocharger. It's like choosing our heads for a gas engine. That sets our RPM window, and then we try and tune to get the best possible results in that window, especially for P700 trucks that are going to have timing that's only going to work in this narrow area. Because I guess you can say, so because of the diesel fuel, like its chemical makeup, so because it requires you to run this really high AFR, it makes it hard to make power. We can kind of, I guess I could do the math really quick. 20.9, say we got a good tune, 20.9, 20.9 divided by 0.4. So like right here, this is 52 horsepower at a 25 to 1 AFR, 52 wheel, and at 2,500 with, what was it, 70, it was 77? 74. 74 divided by 0.4. So right here we would be at 185 horsepower. So we've went from the 36 horsepower to 185 horsepower, basically because we're waiting for the turbo to come online. And now our horsepower would go up if we reduced AFR, but the cost in this is that the exhaust output begins to get hazier, or begins to haze, and then if we go below that, it begins to get darker and darker until it turns into a lingering smoke. So for P700 guys, it is your pre-boost. What is pre-boost? Maybe go over what pre-boost is. Pre-boost is a setting on the back of the P700 pump, and it sets the minimum AFC foot back travel towards you. So what happens when you step on the pedal, there's some control levers in there that come forward and they bottom out against the AFC's foot. The AFC foot doesn't come all the way back to the lever, or the truck won't start. We had a truck the other day come in that had a attitude adjuster on it, and the knobs were just basic knobs were installed right. So when they would turn it below level 4, as it's called in the attitude adjuster, the fuel plate was actually pushing back or up against the lever system inside the pump. So when you would try and start it, the rack couldn't come forward to get into the start position. It was almost, basically it's always in a situation where the CC it would inject is so low the truck can't run, or 2, the spill ports were always uncovered because of how far the rack was retarded down the slide. So what the pre-boost does is it sets when the AFC foot returns backwards, so when there's no pressure on the diaphragm, it's a stop. So it stops right there, and your throttle can move. If you're ever in your truck and you have a fuel plate in it, you can step on the pedal, and it's really soft until you hit a hard spot. That hard spot is where the lever system is hitting the AFC foot, and now when you push down on the pedal, when you floor it, the rack actually stays in the same position, and you stretch a spring system inside of the pump that allows your pedal to go to the floor, but the rack to stay in the same position. And now there's spring tension on there. So now as the boost pressure comes into the AFC's housing and it moves the foot forward, the rack travels forward at a rate that the boost pressure fills up the AFC housing without you having to pedal it. So like systems that don't have an AFC on them, called ag governors or RSVs or AGs, don't have that system in place, and an RQV, which is the auto governor, do. So what we've found is what you go and put your bigger injectors in. What you need to do is set the pre-boost back a little bit farther typically, because at the same pedal position we're putting more fuel in the chamber, but we still have, say we're cruising at 3 pounds of boost, or cruising at 3 or 5 pounds of boost on a stock setup. The whole factory calibration is set up to where you can get into it and it might make a little puff and then go. That's because it was factory tuned to that AFR setting. Now we just reduce the AFR with bigger injectors and bigger DVs. We now need to personally accommodate for this by reducing the pre-boost and stiffening up the star wheel to account for the mechanically injected fuel that's at a higher quantity than it was from the OEM. Okay, so yeah, that reminds me, we were talking about what happens when you do when you increase the charger size and increase the fuel, why it tends to be dirty. So we can kind of go over that real quick. So say you got your stock turbocharger and you like the response, and now you go and put injectors in and DVs in and the response gets better. It gets better because we're making more engine power, and as well as increasing the amount of energy in the exhaust itself because we put more fuel in the chamber. So we reduce the AFR, torque and horsepower goes up. Because of that, the turbo spools faster. What happens a lot is people order a horsepower kit from a manufacturer, and that kit will come with turbocharger and injectors, or a turbocharger injector DVs, or turbocharger and big injectors if it's a common rail, who knows. But they tend to come together in these kits a lot of times. So what'll happen is that stock turbocharger is basically as fast a spooling turbocharger as you're ever going to get. If anybody online says that this aftermarket turbocharger spools faster than stock, they're either wrong or the turbocharger is smaller than stock. So they're lying to you, or the turbo is smaller than stock. There is no higher flowing turbocharger that spools faster than stock. As physics says that doesn't work, and we've seen it on the dyno every single time. We have not seen one turbo on the dyno that is faster than stock spooling, yet flows more, right? So those two things, they don't go together, they don't work. Physics also says that they don't work. So what happens is that stock turbo got to 20 pounds of boost by 1500 RPM. So that means that we can put X amount of fuel in based off of that whole equation. And then what happens is you put bigger injectors in, you don't tune it, and then you put a bigger turbocharger on. So the bigger turbocharger now, instead of 20 pounds of boost at 1500, has 10 pounds of boost at 1500. But now our fuel quantity, because we didn't change the tune, is still the same. Our AFR drops drastically. And when you do that, you get smoke and heat. And the truck will only make the amount of power, because now we went from over aired to over fueled. So the AFR kind of flips on its head. So you get into this condition where we're over fueling it, but the thing will literally only make what the amount of air is available, as far as it'll only make the horsepower that the air allows it to make. So if we had 20 pounds of boost at 1500 and we reduced it to 10 pounds at 1500, you know, that's quite a bit of reduction in pounds minute of air moved. If you looked at our earlier videos, we show you how to calculate all that stuff. But just because the turbo got bigger doesn't mean you get more air at all RPMs. And that's especially true if you have less boost pressure at the previously same RPM. So what happens is you put everything on, and the AFR just dropped because you screwed the tune all up by putting a big turbocharger on and injectors without changing the tune. It's not that it's bad, I should say, like it's not an inherent bad thing, it's that it wasn't accounted for. Everything was just put on, and we didn't reduce the fuel quantity even though we lost boost pressure at the lower RPM spectrum. So we can actually do that real fast. I'm going to take a second. So let's just use the 2.12 density ratio that we did for 2500 just to keep it easy. So that was 20 pounds of boost. So if we had 20 pounds of boost at 1500 RPMs on the stock turbocharger, that'd be 2.12 times 124.65, 264.258 CFM times 0.07 gives us 18.4 pounds a minute. So 20 psi, 18.49 pounds air min. So if we want to do real quick, we can go to 18.49 times 8, 147. So this comes out to 147.92 wheel horsepower. And if we wanted to calculate the cc's real quick, what we could do is take our 18.49 times 60 and then divide by 25. Actually, I think I've already had it. I have 44 up there already? Almost. 44.37, convert, 465.9 cc's, 465.9 divided by 6. So in this state, we can do 70, so 77.65 cc's at 25:1 AFR. So let's say we went to a bigger turbocharger and we left the fuel alone. We left it at 77.65 cc's or 44.37 pounds hour fuel. Well, we lost 10 psi. Let's calculate what the AFR would be if this happened. This might be a little bit of a long segment here, but I think this will actually get a really clear ending to this video. And this is a long-winded video, but this is really important and it's really tricky and takes a lot of time, usually on the owner's part, to get all this right. So if we lost 10 pounds of boost, so 10 plus 4, actually it's just fucking 7 divided by 14.7, so 1.68 pressure ratio times 0.7 times 1.5, so 1.76. Density ratio 1.76 times 124.65, 219, 9 CFM times 0.07, 15.39 pounds air hour times 60, 923.6 pounds hour. So if you want to find the AFR, what we just did, okay, easy. It will be 923 divided by 44.37. So now we're at a, yep, so what you do to find out what the AFR dropped to is we just take our new pounds hour air and divide it by the same fuel quantity we're putting in. So we would take this and our previous fuel quantity in is 44.37 pounds hour of fuel, gives us 20.8. So we left the fuel alone. Well, we put on a bigger turbocharger and lost boost pressure at a low engine RPM. We just went from 25 to 1 AFR to a 20.8 to 1 AFR. So it doesn't seem that significant, but what happens is this typically is 10 pounds is typically, say, 5 pounds or 3 pounds. Like say you went from the stock turbo to a S366 0.91 T4. This is probably at 1500 is going to be 0, 0 to 1, maybe 2. With say, say you're rolling converter locked or it's a manual truck. That's typically what you're going to have. So this AFR is even lower than that. So you're putting the same fuel in, we didn't trim it back. and now it's hot and smoky. And it's going to follow that trend through the whole spectrum until the turbo gets up to a high enough boost pressure, which nets a high enough density ratio to net the correct mixing to clean it up. Brake specific regardless, that's what's going on. So I think that was a good explanation to end this on, how you can use the smoke to understand what your AFR is. So, and how to tune it. You're basically just going to drive it, and you're going to roll into it or step on it, however you drive. If you drive into it mostly rolling into it, then tune it how you drive. If you drive it mostly stepping on it, then you're probably going to have to take a lot more AFC out of the thing. Tighten the starter up a lot, take a lot of pre-boost out, because you're letting the mechanical computer do the work for you, but you need to set the computer up to work properly. Where if you roll into it, you can usually run a little bit more rich on the AFR and still not end up in the smoke condition, just because we're not letting the computer have as much control over the system. Our foot is still kind of helping to compromise to some degree of what's going on. And sometimes that's how I like to drive, is kind of a compromise between the two. Sometimes I do need the extra torque, and I like it to be there. And other times I just want to drive regular and I don't need it. So that's kind of the compromise. If you're kind of a roll into it type, it allows you to kind of have that setting a little bit on the soft side. So if you do need the torque for a reason, it'll be there. And if you just want to step on it all the time, then you're going to have to run a much tighter setup so you can let the mechanical computer do all the work for you. So you pin it, you hit the AFC foot, and then the spring system takes over, so your foot goes to the floor, but the rack stays in the same place. Boost pressure starts to come up, and it pushes the AFC foot forward. And because the lever system is against the AFC foot, the rack goes forward, which turns the plungers, which increases the duration of the injection event, which increases the cc's put in. And you can do all of that on the injection pump itself. It is not hard. It's 3 things. And then you can just set the fuel plate. If you got a 600cc pump and you want it to only move 300 cc's, then you just, because the fuel plate's in there, you just put the fuel plate to 300 cc's. Simple as that. Not a whole lot to it. It's really fun. We're going to be doing some cc testing soon on the dyno. It'll be really fun. Thank you for watching. I know this was a long one, but this is one that probably, I get asked quite a bit about it, and we did get a comment on YouTube about it. So first comment on YouTube, awesome. As well as something you kind of get asked quite a bit, especially on higher horsepower stuff that's running bigger turbochargers, what's kind of going on. So I think it went over it pretty well. If you do have any questions about it, please put them in the comment section. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because our next one hopefully will be even awesomer than this one. So y'all have a good night. Thank you.